My husband found pictures of me and my affair on internet and decided to ruin my life. You know, when the consequences of your actions hit you like a tidal wave, and you start to ponder if you had done things differently, maybe you wouldn't be where you were at that moment of you wondering. That was the stage of life I was at. If I had put in more effort into my marriage and loved my husband more and not started having an affair, I would still have a bit of my sanity left. Well, what did I think would be the outcome for marrying a man for his money? I had an affair with another man even though I was married to my husband of 5 years, and now my life has been ruined. My husband saw pictures of my affair and I on the internet and didn't spare me before divorcing me and leaving me with nothing. He didn't even give me a chance to explain myself. He just went straight on into revenge mode. I didn't have an explanation by myself, even LOL. It just happened, but why did he have to ruin my life? I know I deserved it. You all on here will think that I deserved it. I had cheated on my husband. I had even done it in our home and I had lied to his face and all that. But just know that I never planned for my marriage to end this way in the beginning. I thought I was going to fall in love and have beautiful children and get to live out my own happily ever after just like every little girl. But life came at me and I learned the hard way. Let me tell you my experience of how my husband ruined my life from the beginning. Sit tight and relax. My name is Sarah and I'm 30 years old and my husband, or should I say ex-husband's name is Mark, and he's 35 or something along the lines of that age. Let's just say he's in his mid-30s because I don't remember anything about his age or life since he decided to ruin my life. You can tell I'm lying, LOL. Anyway, I met my husband when I was 24. That's about 6 years ago. I had met him at a work function. It was a party celebrated at my workplace every year for everyone to get to know each other. He had been there for the party as a higher-up representative, or that was what he had told me when I had the courage to slide up to him and introduce myself. I didn't know he was going to turn out to be my boss. We exchanged contacts that evening and began chatting. Not frequently, but the once in a while, hello, how are you kind of stuff. Over time, he asked me out on a date and I went because I had thought he was cute, you know. I hadn't been looking for anything serious. We went on one date and I noticed he was a control freak, but I thought it was just me and I was just seeing things. He invited me on our second date and that was when I found out that he had money and he was rich. I became interested at the sight of the green money bags. I mean, who the heck wouldn't? My husband courted me properly. I can't lie. He showered me with expensive gifts, luxury items, vacations, classy dates, and everything that would make a girl want to sell her soul for him. Then the big shocker came. I found out he was my boss. He was the general manager of our branch of the office and only came in once in a while, so I hadn't known. So my husband called me back then into his office and said he wanted to marry me. Straight on, asked you guys. No mushy proposal, no gathering of friends and family. He just went right on to it and began to list the pros and cons of getting married to him. We hadn't even dated for a year. I had just met him 6 months ago. At that point in time, I couldn't believe what I had witnessed either. But also at that point in time, I had needed money like crazy, and he had said I would get heavily compensated for marrying him. My ears just heard money, and I accepted to marry him. This was my first mistake. I had accepted to marry him and signed a prenuptial contract that said if I walked out of the marriage, I wouldn't be getting any of my husband's property. Accepting to marry my husband without there being a proper love base in our relationship was where my ruination began. We had just been two people pushed together to marry and then live in the same house. I didn't know this was going to be the end game of my marriage with him. I should have pushed myself to love him. I did push myself to love him, but we had never been meant to be in the first place. Anyway, we got married a little hush-hush. I couldn't even invite my friends and only had my sister from my family come for my wedding. My husband had his people show up and we got married on a beach under the warm afternoon sun. I moved in with my husband and the first year of our marriage passed by in a blur. The heavy compensation for getting married to him had been a condo property in downtown LA. Big, right? I can't wait for you to find out what became of that at my mess up. Anyway, he had said that he didn't want kids at the moment as he was still busy trying to build sustenance, and I totally accepted because I didn't want kids either, and we hadn't even talked about any of these things before we got married. Our second year of marriage went by, and the third year of marriage went by. By our fourth year of marriage, I began to notice how much of a control freak my husband was. Don't get me wrong, I had been noticing it since, but by our fourth year of being married together, I found out that my husband had an issue with not being obeyed. We had gone for a party, one of his friends' parties. I recall the friend had gotten engaged and had thrown a little party to tell all his friends and introduce his wife to them. He had been a game having friends. Can you imagine that? Anyway, we had gone for the party, and when we got there, I had leaned down to hug my husband's friend, and you should have seen the way my husband reacted. He had dragged me back by my gown, and I had almost stumbled to the ground if not because he had been behind me to hold me up. I had stared at him like, what the heck? And he had subtly shook his head at me. In my head, I had been like, what, I couldn't hug men now. I had let it slide, guys, but throughout the year it continued like that. I couldn't wear a certain type of clothing. This man didn't allow me to wear dresses that showed off my thighs and didn't let me wear anything that could even highlight my curves even a little bit. Going out with him was like I was attending a monastery. I tried to see the good in what he was doing, but I doubt it came from a place in his heart. Was he possessive or jealous and didn't want other men to see my body? I didn't think so, and I had thought about that being the problem. But the thing with my husband was that he never showed his emotion. I could never tell that he loved me or wanted me. Oh, I could tell if he was angry or livid, all right. But when it came to things like Kobe and feelings and letting me know that he cared, he had been a closed book. Which lady liked any of those things? And don't come for me saying I had married him for money, so what did I expect? Well, that was why I had started having an affair in the first place then. It was because I had lacked the love of a man. Anyway, I'm getting to that. My husband never showed any of his feelings to me and was as controlling as the CIA. Sure, he gave me gifts. My husband could never go wrong with gifting, but at some point the gifting didn't cut it anymore. I had honestly grown tired, even at work. He made me go crazy at my job. Never marry someone that worked in the same place as you. Anything I did was under terrible scrutiny by him. And everyone knew I was married to him, so the lurking pity eyes I got whenever I got scolded for something anyone could have missed was infuriating. I had almost considered quitting my job. He even told me I should. Can you imagine that? I should quit my job. I knew he could provide for me quite all right, but then I would stay in the house and let his controlling drive me crazy. Ain't no way I was going to do that. There was a crazy time when my husband had come back home from work and then suggested we go to the hospital to test for infections, and then to freeze my eggs so I could have children anytime I wanted. Who randomly came up with crazy things like that and didn't rest until he had his way? My husband did. And he made us go to the hospital that night and made me endure every poking and prodding knowing I hated needles. Heck, maybe he didn't even know, just so he could feel good or whatever. I was livid that night and thought about ending the marriage. Maybe I could walk away with my house and all the luxurious gift items he had gotten me. Then I remembered that damn agreement I had signed and I sat put. If I left him, then I wasn't going to be getting anything out of the marriage, so let me try to love him so I could at least reap the benefits of being married to a rich man. That was what I had told myself. And I tried. I did what he said when he said, with a grudge, by the way. I tried to be romantic and do that love him enough for the two of us BS, but it was like I was hitting on a brick wall. My husband wasn't capable of love, and even with all the money in the world, I don't think I could be with someone who didn't love. I took him on dates, tried to know what he liked and disliked, and it just ended up in a disaster. The dates always ended up with him telling me what I could eat and what I couldn't eat, what wine to drink and what wine I couldn't drink. And do you know this man made me pay for all the dinners I took him on? Hilarious, right? That was my husband. He said I was the one taking him out and so I had to pay. He wouldn't waste his money on taking me out when there was food at home and didn't know why I was bothering myself. This was someone I had been trying to get to know and find a way to love. Do you think I was exaggerating with him? I didn't think I was back then. But when shit came down, I knew I could have done more and not let my fantasies on how perfect a man should be to ruin my reality. By the time we marked our 5th anniversary, my husband began traveling out of the city more. Our workplace had expanded and they wanted him on the project. It was later I found out that where I worked was owned by his family and he was the sole heir. 5 years of marriage to this man and he didn't think to tell me he was the heir to one of the largest franchise stores in LA. They had been looking to expand and I had thought they had just put my husband on the project so he could oversee it. He had won the Employee of the Year award 5 times. Now that I think about it, it could have all been rigged in his favor, LOL. Anyway, my husband began traveling more often and I began having time to myself to think and breathe and not be under the scrutiny of my husband 24/7. But then the idle mind is the devil's workshop, as they say. I began to have thoughts. Rich people always had 1 or 2 affairs on the side, didn't they? Maybe they had been as unhappy as I was and found the person who could give them the love they wanted on the side, so they had secret affairs. That had got to be the only reason why rich people had affairs, and I was just about to fall clutches deep into one. I met a guy on Facebook one day as I was randomly scrolling, not like I met him. I stumbled upon his pictures and my mouth watered and my libido ached for the first time since being married. My husband was terrible at S*X too, and I tried to avoid having it with him as much as possible. That was why he had taken me to the hospital to find out if I had an infection, Elmau. Anyway, I stumbled upon sexy guy's pictures, and when my female reproductive organs ached for the first time in 5 years, I knew I had to have him. I was still beautiful and sexy, so which man wouldn't want to have me, and I was rich. Well, rich by association, but the guy didn't need to know that, so I slid into his DM. Luckily, as life would have it, he was in my part of LA, and after a day and night of chatting and flirting with him, sexy guy wanted to meet up with me. Double luckily, my husband was out of town for that week, so I could go hook up with sexy guy and wipe the slate clean. I swore it was only going to be a one-time. You see those thoughts of rich people having an affair? I didn't have them until I had been handled by sexy guy. Let's call him Owen. Owen was bad news, but I hadn't known, of course. I had just been in it to fulfill my sexual needs at first, and I hadn't known that Owen was going to be the reason I was in this mess right now. I spent the weekend at Owen's place, and I had never been handled by anybody the way Owen handled me, and I was lost. I forgot all about my plot to make my husband love me, which I like to think I achieved, by the way, and I couldn't get enough of Owen. What was meant to be a one-time thing turned to 2, and then 3, and then 4, and I couldn't stop going back for more. My husband was out of town most times, so I had all the time in the world to spend with Owen. On Fridays, I would head straight to his place after work and let him send me to heaven with his tool, and I wouldn't want to go back to my house by the time the weekend was over. My husband was never going to find out. That was what I told myself, as it was meant to be just sex between Owen and I. I had even stopped flirty chatting with him to avoid catching feelings for him, but I guess it was inevitable. My husband got back from his trip, and I focused all my mind and attention into trying to love him and get him to shower me with more gifts, LOL. And when he traveled back again, I found myself at Owen's place. Owen was a pro, and I fell into his clutches. He had all the qualities I wanted in a guy. Loving, caring, attentive, hot, and not to mention super great in bed. Owen was the person I would have married if I hadn't been with my husband, and Owen didn't know I was married already. He was thoughtful and was in tune to every need in my body. I'm not trying to make Owen sound poetic, but it was just who he was. But I didn't know he was a snake, or was it a wolf in sheep's clothing? I'll get to that. Things between Owen and I were supposed to end at just sex. I didn't know how I had fallen for him, and he had my life in his hands. I was having an affair with another man while I was already married to someone else, and I didn't mind. I did mind one bit. But life was about to play a game on me. I was rich, and I didn't hide that from Owen. I bought him gifts, gave him money to do whatever it was he was into. I didn't ask because that would have led to him asking me, and I couldn't as well tell him I was married. Anyway, I did all these things for Owen. And what did he do? Brutally stab me in the back. I got brave, and I think this was what brought about my ruin. I got brave with Owen. With my husband gone for a week, sometimes 2, I got brave. I didn't have any friends, so I didn't have anyone who was going to catch me and report me to my husband, so I began taking Owen out on dates. Not in broad daylight, I still had my husband's friends to be afraid of. I took him out in the night so we could enjoy the thrills that came with being together and out in the open. He didn't know I wasn't supposed to actually be with him, or should I say he did know and was just playing along to gullible old me. And if I was anything, I was gullible. We went out on dates, classy restaurants, amusement parks, and the movies. I was having too much fun with him, and you shouldn't blame me because I hadn't experienced this in my lifetime. I schooled in Texas with my parents, watching my every move like a hawk, so I couldn't have a boyfriend or take him out to see the movies and do all that romantic BS. So I was experiencing that with Owen for the first time in my life. But then I became too carefree. I could remember running into one of my husband's friends at a restaurant one time. I had thought my soul would leave my body and the ground would open up and swallow me then and there. My husband's friend had been on a date with his wife, and they had been leaving the restaurant when our eyes met at the entrance of the restaurant. He was coming out and I was going in, and I had my arms wrapped around Owen. And I thought for sure that I was done for then. He had looked between me and Owen, and I had introduced Owen as my new and truly gay business partner. Owen had stared at me like I was crazy, but I had awkwardly laughed and patted his arm, all in the bid to make it look like there was nothing romantic going on between Owen and I. Luckily, he bought it because he smiled at me and left, and I didn't hear about me cheating from my husband. I became extra careful after that incident. We reduced our outings, and my husband got back from his trip. It was so funny how I had juggled between giving my attention to the two of them. My husband was someone that would notice something was wrong at the drop of a hat and would begin to investigate immediately, so I had to make sure he didn't suspect something. In an effort to please him, I had to quit my job so he would be distracted by that fact and not begin to wonder if I was cheating on him. He was pleased and happy that I had finally seen the light. I had even told him I was ready to have a baby. All these things just to get him off my back and not make him think something was wrong. I was nitpicking. I changed Owen's contact name to a laundromat number in the case he searched my phone because you really couldn't tell with my husband. He could search my phone and find out that I was having an affair, and that would be the end of me. LOL, I didn't know there were bigger plans for me. I didn't know the universe had been plotting an even bigger downfall than my husband just simply searching my phone and finding out that I was having an affair. Like a moth to a flame. I couldn't resist Owen's charm, and I had gone back to him in the night when my husband had gone away for his final trip to conclude the business expansion, whatever he had been working on. I didn't know when a photographer had taken a picture of me kissing Owen as I walked into his house, or that the photographer had followed us to the restaurant where we had our dinner date. I hadn't known all these things. In my mind, I had just gone out to hang out with Owen one last time before my husband became stable in our city again, and became his usual controlling self. I hadn't known that was going to be the biggest mistake of the century in my life. I enjoyed the dinner date, and then Owen had taken me back to his home and he had made sure I never forgot his name in bed. At least even though he did me dirty, I can say I enjoyed the S**X LOL. I will admit to a good thing when I can. I was at home with my phone scrolling like 2 days after seeing Owen for the last time when I got a notification from an unknown number, and I clicked open the message to see a news link with my picture next to the headline. I had almost dropped my phone at the sight. I was so shocked that I opened it immediately and my whole mood turned sour. In the pictures, Owen and I had been dining together in a restaurant, and when I had kissed him in front of his house before following him in and then coming out of his home and seeing me enter into his car. The headline read, "Cheating Wife," and I had been shocked to say the least. What did a blog want from me? I wasn't a celeb that people had any interest in. I was just a regular married woman, so why had I been the person of interest? Luckily, it hadn't been viewed by a lot of people, and the writer had left his contact number to it, so I called him immediately with my hands shaking, and he answered. I told him to take down the pictures immediately, and this blog writer had the right to blackmail me. He said if I wasn't ready to pay him the money, he was going to post it on every online news outlet and social media blog. What if my husband saw it? What was I going to do? I begged the writer to take it down, and he said the only way he could do that was if I paid the sum of $5,000 into his account. I went to my savings immediately and transferred the money into his account. I was desperate and didn't want my husband finding out. He had just been talking about getting me a big gift. I wasn't going to let some stupid blogger ruin that and my chance of living rich with this man. Immediately, the blogger confirmed payment. I opened the link to the news and it was no longer opening. That was when I had realized I had been scammed. By that time, my head had calmed down to finally process what had just happened. I had just been blackmailed. Why? I hadn't known then. I hadn't known it had been a scheme by someone I had trusted most. I found out the hard way. Everything was quiet the next few weeks. In fact, I thought all my problems had finally fixed themselves because Owen had finally stopped disturbing my phone with calls and text messages. My husband has been more attentive ever since I told him I wanted to have a child. He wasn't all that bad anymore, and I was focused on what he had promised me for me once I had the child, so I couldn't let myself get distracted by Owen. In the end, money trumped love LOL. Anyway, things had been going smoothly on my end. Then one day, out of the blue, I got a call from an unknown number. The person on the call told me I was to pay a sum of $10,000 to his account if I didn't want to risk my husband finding out what I had done behind his back. That wasn't what I had been expecting at all. My blackmailer had come back. I was once again scared and had to ask my husband for the money because I didn't have anything in my savings account. You know when you're so desperate to the point when your lies hook you. I told my husband I was pregnant, and as a gift for the baby, I wanted $10,000. I had a fake pregnancy report ready in case he didn't believe, but he believed me with such ease. I never knew that was how bad he wanted a child. I lied to him when I should have just come clean and faced the consequences then and there. My husband was ecstatic when I had told him I was pregnant and gave me the money immediately. It was as if him hearing that he was expecting a child from me just completely changed him. He began being careful with me and telling me all the things I needed to know about having a baby. He was so happy. He asked if I needed to go for a checkup and all the hospital visits to ensure the baby was healthy. I lied to him and told him that I had already been to the OBGYN, and they said the baby was healthy. He was pleased with the reply. It was like he finally trusted me, and I was betraying that trust. This was what broke me for real. But I didn't confess what I had done to him. I told myself that once everything was all over, and I made certain the blackmailer was out of my life, I was going to fake a miscarriage, and then work towards giving my husband an actual baby. Karma looked me in the eye and laughed. Meanwhile, my blackmailer told me to bring the money to a location and drop it there and leave. I packed the money and went to the location. I saw a car parked there and dropped the money according to instructions, but I decided to stay back to see if I could get any information on my blackmailer. It wasn't even up to 5 minutes, and Owen was walking out from behind a dumpster to take the bag, and I saw red. I got out of my car without thinking and marched up to confront him. He had been the one blackmailing me. The pictures, the news, they had all been him. I told him he was a mad, weak, and lazy man who would never have anything good in his life because he took from people. I couldn't believe it was Owen that had been trying to destroy my life. I asked him why did he do it? Like, why me of all people? Owen just laughed and said I was rich and he needed some money. Plus, I was the most gullible person on earth, so he just had to play with me a little. Apparently, he ran into my type once every 2 weeks. I had to get revenge. My third and final mistake before everything came tumbling down. I hired some men to go beat up Owen and make sure he deleted those pictures he had of me because I knew if I left him, he would want to blackmail me again, and I couldn't have that. I paid off the goons with my last savings and told them to make sure those pictures vanished from existence so I could finally have some peace and love my husband back and build a family. A week later, the men reported back to me that the job's been done. I could finally breathe, but my air supply was about to be cut short. The beating had only seemed to rile up Owen to do what he had wanted to do in the first place before he had thought of using them for blackmail, and I had provoked the sleeping tiger. My husband came back home angry and threw his phone at me immediately. I opened the door to welcome him. I caught the phone and saw my pictures on the internet, the ones that Owen took to blackmail me. They had been everywhere. The son of a bitch had pasted my pictures everywhere on the internet, and it was getting a lot of comments. He even added a video from us having S*X on the bed and blurred out his face, and mine was quite clear for all who knew me to see. I couldn't even utter words, and my husband was already throwing my things out of his house. He didn't waste any time in flinging out my luggages. He didn't even give me the time to explain or come up with a lie, and I was seeing myself being pushed out of the door. I begged, and all he said was that I would get a message from his lawyer. This was how my life ended in ruins. My husband had decided to be done with me. But did I stay and stop making mistakes? No. It was like I was in auto control to ruin my life to the fullest. I went to go and contest with my husband for the right to his property, not remembering that we had signed a prenup agreement. I had been desperate to get revenge when I had seen the divorce papers as I had gone to clear out my locker at work. The stares they had all been giving me was enough to make me want the ground to swallow me whole. But I had to keep my head high. With my last savings, I had hired a lawyer and then went to battle my husband in court for his property. Wrong mistake. The prenup agreement was revealed in court and my signature was clearly there on the paper, so my plan to part ways with half of my husband's property was crushed. I then thought I could contest for my house that he had gotten me, but the sneaky man had gotten the house under his name and had lied to me that it was mine. I paid through my nose for the court charges and lawyer charges, all for nothing. I began seeing the consequences of my actions when I noticed that no one was allowing me to work with them. Somehow, anytime I went up to an interview, the video somehow came into play. It was so downgrading, leaving job offers without positive reviews. The stares from the interviewers were alone to make me want to run away. And I did that. I went on to stay with my sister in Edinburgh, North Dakota, and I regret my actions till this day. If only I had tried to love my husband and not be ensnared in the traps of an affair. I would have been enjoying my marriage by now. I hope you guys take my advice and not cheat. You'll regret it like I am doing now. 6 months later. Hi Redditors, I'm here with an update. The worst possible thing happened to me. 2 months later, after my husband divorced me and I moved with my sister, I found out that I was pregnant. The stupid and twisted irony of life. I was pregnant and it wasn't my husband's own child like you figured out already. I was pregnant. Could you imagine that? Where was I going to start from? I was squatting with my sister who already had 2 children, and her husband was already giving me angry looks that I had overstayed my welcome. I hadn't even been able to land a job even after traveling miles away from the bad luck. And now my sister's husband wanted me to leave her house and I was pregnant for another. When I found out, I thought about ending my life. But I geared up the courage to sail through, so I continued applying for jobs. You would think karma was done dealing with me, but it was not. I applied to a grocery store as a cashier. I got it and worked there for about 3 months without any qualms. After 3 months, on the fourth month of my working there, our grocery store was getting sold. Sold to who, you might ask? If you guessed my ex-husband's franchise, you were absolutely correct. Of all my dumb luck. Couldn't I have a breath of peace?
Nope.
My ex-husband came around to survey his store and I couldn't dodge seeing him. He saw me when he came around and he saw my round belly. He had dragged me into his office and demanded to know whether it was his child. I was torn in between lying, but I didn't want karma to have more leverage against me, so said no. I told him who owned the baby and I unlocked a more brutal part of my ex-husband. He gave commands to my manager and told him that I would work extra hours if I was to earn my salary, and I couldn't quit because it was already difficult to find the one job. I stayed on and worked the long hours my manager assigned to me because I didn't have any choice. I shouldn't have stayed too long at the grocery store one evening, and when I got home I was tired. Long story short, I lost my baby in the most cruel setup. I was overworked, WTV stressed, and not eating well, just because my ex-husband had to prove a point. The doctor then told me I would never be able to have kids again while my husband rolled around and lived his best life. I guess he had finally gotten what he wanted. My life was ruined.